We had known each other for 10 years, and Cassius had begged me twice. The first time, he begged me to divorce him and stop pestering him. I agreed. The second time, he begged me to remarry him and not abandon him. I just smiled. It's too late. I got remarried just yesterday. On the second anniversary of my father's death, Cassius accompanied me to pay my respects at his grave. He knelt in front of the grave and apologized. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm going to divorce Celine. It was clearly a divorce from me, yet he went to ask for the forgiveness of a dead person. Hearing me laugh, he frowned unhappily. Celine, please, I'm begging you. Stop pestering me. I don't want to keep wronging Lilith anymore. It started to rain. The fine rain in late spring fell on my face, cold and sharp. The chill surged up layer by layer, and I nodded. Okay, I agree. Since I agreed so readily, he became suspicious instead. What devious plan are you hatching now? Celine, your father is dead. There's no one to protect you anymore. Don't even think about hurting Lilith again. Back then, he had knelt beside my father's hospital bed and promised to take care of me for the rest of my life. Now, in front of my father's grave, he said that no one would protect me anymore. A sickly sweet taste rose in my throat. Tomorrow, we'll go to the registry office. Cassius was about to say something when his cell phone rang. Lilith's panicked voice came from the other end of the phone. Cassius, Feli has a fever of 39 degrees. What should I do? I found it funny. Have you become a doctor? With a fever, instead of going to the hospital, you think you can bring the fever down? Cassius's sharp eyes fixed on my face. Celine, Feli is a child. Can you stop being so mean? He hurried down the steps. I raised my voice to taunt him. Cassius, be careful when raising someone else's child. Don't be like my father. After raising someone for so many years, it turns out to be an ungrateful wretch. He paused, his eyes as cold as ice. Celine, I've already paid off what I owed your family long ago. I shouldn't have been soft-hearted and agreed to marry you back then. Perhaps the debt of gratitude can be repaid. But what about the love I gave you? Can you give it back to me? Suddenly, the rain grew heavier. The back of him as he left was so resolute. He was going to be the knight for another woman. Completely forgetting his wife who didn't have an umbrella and whose coat was still in his car, I waited at the old bus stop for over 10 minutes and finally managed to hail a taxi. The driver peeked at me several times through the rearview mirror, seeing my pale face, black clothes, and drenched body. I stretched out my hand towards him. Do you want to touch me? I'm alive. The driver gave an embarrassed smile and took out a towel and handed it to me during a red light. Wipe yourself. It's new. He chattered on. You young people always take advantage of your good health and don't take care. When you reach my age, you'll regret it. However, I won't live to your age. I'm dying. The rain was falling harder and harder, hitting the car window fiercely, making a crackling sound, just like the day when I first met Cassius 10 years ago. That was on my 15th birthday. My usually busy father had promised that he would definitely accompany me. I waited until 9 o'clock in the evening, and he finally came back. Not only had he forgotten my birthday, but he also brought Cassius back with him. It was pouring rain outside, and the crystal chandelier in the living room was swaying in the draft. The wind blew the thin teenager's old white shirt up, and he looked like a sail adrift on the vast sea. My father said that an old friend had passed away and only this child was left. He would live in our house from then on. My mother immediately flew into a rage. She accused him of not being able to let go of his first love and now even bringing the son of his first love to our home. It was really going too far. My mother cursed my father for being ungrateful, and my father said my mother was being unreasonable. During their scuffle, they kicked over the cake that I had ordered a month in advance and which was placed under the table. I squatted down, dipped my finger in the cream on the cake, and took a lick. It was bitter. My mother kicked me. Eat, eat, eat. Even when people are bullying us, you still have the mood to eat. My father's eyes were bloodshot. Celine has been spoiled by you. The sound of them bringing up old scores and accusing each other was like a sharp weapon cutting through my eardrums. It was really annoying. I stood up and shouted at them, get a divorce. Can you just get a divorce? Mom, since he doesn't love you, don't be so cheap and keep clinging to him. Dad, Grandpa is dead. What are you afraid of? Now no one dares to say to your face that you got ahead because of your wife. Slap. A slap landed heavily on my face. My father was breathing heavily, like a beast that had been stepped on its sore spot. Shut up. Hypocritical adults. They always get angry out of shame when their fig leaves are torn off. I clenched my teeth tightly to hold back my tears and turned to go upstairs. When passing by Cassius, I bumped hard against his shoulder. Get out of my way. Even though my mother objected, Cassius still moved into our house and transferred to the same high school as me. You see how pitiful women who are not loved are. Men never care about their wishes. My father solemnly entrusted me to Cassius. Celine has a bad temper and her grades are not good. Take good care of her at school. He was very obedient. He was almost like my shadow. When we were having lunch in the cafeteria, he carried his tray and sat across from me, took away my ice-cold cola, and handed me a cup of hot milk. Your cough has just gotten better. Drink this. His simplicity and restraint were completely different from our carefree and unrestrained selves. A group of friends laughed. Celine, you're still not weaned yet. At that time, we were very rebellious. Although we were still children, we deliberately pretended that we had already grown up. Orion was full of hostility. Celine, who is he? Why is he so nosy? Cassius straightened his back. His old white shirt made his features look even more refined. I withdrew my gaze and answered casually, someone my father found for me, a bodyguard. Cassius's long eyebrows furrowed. Orion put the empty cola bottle in front of him. Bodyguard, throw away the trash. Cassius's hand holding the chopsticks suddenly tightened and the veins on the back of his hand bulged. He turned his eyes and looked at me deeply. I raised my eyebrows indifferently. Can't you understand human language? Of course, he understood, but he didn't do as he was told. At that time, I was really mean and never had kind words for him. He brought me breakfast, helped me with my studies, and held an umbrella for me. But I still didn't like him, because my father would say every day, learn from Cassius. Can't you make things easier for me? Because my parents would quarrel because of him every week. That time, they had another fierce quarrel. I fled to an internet cafe and asked Orion and a few others to play games with me. Soon, Cassius also came. He was carrying physics exercise books and sat right next by me. The internet cafe was so noisy and the lighting was dim. He was wearing an old coat with sleeves that were a bit short. Because he had allergic pharyngitis, he would cover his lips and cough softly from time to time when irritated by the cigarette smoke. Orion handed me a cigarette. Want a puff? I took it and leaned over to light it. Cassius snatched it away. Aldrich said you can't smoke. Again, he used my father to suppress me. I felt a surge of annoyance in my heart. Then you smoke it. If you finish smoking this cigarette, I'll go back with you. Orion threw the lighter to him with a smile. Pulling a good student down from his pedestal was also the vulgar and low-class fun for us hooligans. Cassius hesitated for a few seconds, took the cigarette from my hand, and as the lighter produced a small flame, he lowered his head and leaned forward. As soon as the cigarette was lit, he started coughing violently. He coughed all the while until he finished smoking the whole cigarette. Then he pulled me to stand up. Let's go back. When we got home, my parents' quarrel had already ended. My mother, sitting among the mess on the floor, looked up and asked me, why can that bitch give birth to a sensible and smart son? I've put so much effort into it, yet I've raised such a stupid and useless thing like you. Yeah. Why is that? Why do other people's parents live in harmony? Why do other people's parents comfort their children softly when they are sad? A week later, my mother committed suicide. That day was the 20th anniversary of her marriage to my father. My father said he had an important client to meet and couldn't come back. My mother overturned the table full of dishes that she had prepared herself into the room and didn't come out for a long time. I was worried and opened the door of the master bedroom. I saw the glaring red bloodstains, like a rope, winding out from the bathroom and tightening around my neck. I trembled as I pushed the bathroom door. Cassius suddenly appeared from somewhere and covered my eyes. Don't look. Tears welled up and wet his fingers. Cassius, will I never have a mother again from now on? He hung up on 120 and said word by word, don't be afraid. You still have me. You still have me. After waking up from a hazy dream, those words still lingered in my ears. I took my temperature with a thermometer. It was 39.5 degrees Celsius. The ibuprofen I took last night had no effect at all. Well, with acute myeloid leukemia plus a fever caused by catching a cold, just a few fever-reducing pills couldn't suppress it at all. I picked up my phone and wanted to call Orion. The former hooligan now looked presentable and worked in a hospital. His mentor was also my attending doctor. As a result, there were many WeChat messages from Cassius on my phone. I'll wait for you at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau at 9 o'clock. At 8:40, he urged, why haven't you come yet? At 9 o'clock, he called me, but I didn't answer. At 9:05, he sent, I can't believe I trusted you. You're just like your mother, wanting to waste my whole life, right? It felt like glass shards had been rubbed into my eyes. It hurt terribly. I dialed the number, Orion. Just as I called out the name, the bedroom door was pushed open. Cassius, with a cold expression, leaned against the door. I waited for you at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau for an hour. I have a fever, so I didn't go. Cassius's eyes were cold and disgusted. Celine, stop pretending, okay? You're calling Orion. Do you want to prove that you're still charming and make me jealous? Aren't you tired of using such boring tricks? My heart felt like it was boiling in hot water. I put on a vicious smile, not tired. After all, you're back, aren't you? He furrowed his long eyebrows. I'm not back for you. I have other things to do. As soon as he finished speaking, Lilith led Feli and poked their heads out. She had a timid expression. Cassius, is it inconvenient for me and Felly to live in your house? Anger almost blew the top of my head off. You know it's inconvenient, yet you still come? Are you so eager to take over my place? I took out my wallet and pulled out a card. Are you short of money to stay in a hotel? Here, take it and go. Don't show up in front of me and dirty my eyes. Before I could finish speaking, Cassius reached out and slapped my hand. Celine, enough is enough. With a slap sound, the back of my hand swelled up and turned red, and the wallet fell to the ground. The wedding photo in the wallet was thrown out. Cassius was briefly stunned. He took a step forward. At this time, Lilith said, Cassius, Felly is almost recovered. I'd better go rent a house in the urban village. I have the rent money. No need. Cassius seemed to suddenly wake up. He looked up at me, his gaze very cold. It's my name on the property certificate. I can let whoever I want live here. It's not her place to make irresponsible remarks. Before getting married, he took out all his savings and borrowed a large amount of money, insisting on buying this small house. So it was for this day. For those who are not favored, it's useless to raise their voices no matter how loud they are. I just felt an endless sense of weariness. Then you two can live here well. I'm leaving. Cassius' tone was stiff. I didn't ask you to leave. I sneered back. I'm not a beggar. There are plenty of places I can go. Leave this pigeon cage to you two, the scumbag and the bitch. I lifted my foot and stepped hard on that wedding photo. I walked all the way to the stairway entrance and Lilith caught up and grabbed me. Sister Celine, please stay. Don't make things unpleasant because of me. Let go. During the tugging, she secretly gave me a push. Behind me was the spiral staircase. I grabbed the sleeve of Lilith's clothes. If I was going to die, she would come with me. Cassius reacted and quickly stepped forward, stretching out his hand. That hand with distinct knuckles hesitated for a moment in the air. Then, he tightly grasped Lilith's wrist. He held on so tightly, fearing to lose the person he loved, that the veins on his arm bulged out, clearly visible. The crystal chandelier in the corridor hurt my eyes so much that a sharp pain exploded in every cell of my body. I closed my eyes and let go of the corner of Lilith's clothes. Bang! 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 My body tumbled down the stairs, and the pain made my soul curl up. Cassius' panicked shouts squeezed into my ears. Celine, Celine, would I die on the spot if I fell like this? Fortunately, I had already made my will. He couldn't get a penny of my inheritance. I didn't know how many times I had rolled, but suddenly the momentum of falling slowed down. I was caught by someone. Opening my eyes, I met Orion's eyes full of bloodshot. He was extremely angry. Celine, are you out of your mind? Do you want to die? I smiled at him. Hey, don't be so fierce. I'm already sick anyway. Orion's Adam's apple rolled repeatedly. For a moment, it seemed that he was about to cry, but he forced himself to hold back. I'll take you to the hospital. Cassius came forward at this time and explained, Lilith has always been weak and she broke her leg last year. If you hadn't let go just now, I'm sure I could have pulled you both back and you wouldn't have fallen. I'm a proud princess. What I want is unique and exclusive favor, not that little bit of care that leaks through the fingers of other women. I supported myself on Orion and stood up straight, looking quietly at Cassius. If I had fallen to my death just now, would you have regretted it? Would you be like my father, only realizing who you loved after my mother died? Lilith stood on the high steps and said something heart-wrenching. Cassius has always been grateful to you. They all say that without you and your family's support he wouldn't have achieved what he has now. Cassius has a strong sense of self-esteem. He has been trying his best to get rid of the mark of the Celine family and prove himself. I don't know what memories of his were awakened again. He curled his lips. Don't think I didn't see that you originally wanted to drag Lilith down with you. A woman as vicious as you, even if you fall to your death, you deserve it. I won't shed a single tear for you. Orion clenched his fist. Cassius, are you even human? Do you know? I interrupted him and smiled. Very well. Remember what you said now. Don't cry in front of my grave and dirty my way to the afterlife. I had a fever, large areas of skin abrasions and a fractured leg bone. Orion was shaking as he held the blood test results. Perhaps because my heart was too empty, I felt numb all over. With such a serious illness, I didn't even feel uncomfortable. Orion rolled up my sleeve and helped me deal with the bleeding wound. He saw the large bruises on my arm. His eyes were terribly red, and he choked with sobs. Celine, when the fever goes down, let's have chemotherapy, okay? Your illness can't be delayed any longer. Your hair will fall out during chemotherapy and you'll look ugly. After you get well, you can become beautiful again. Preserving your life is the most important thing. I shrugged and answered softly, but Orion, living is really so boring. I was even a bit eager to die. I was in a double ward. Daphne, the girl in the next bed, was a college student and wore a hat even when sleeping. In the evening, her boyfriend and parents brought a specially made cake. They sang the birthday song for her in the ward, and her boyfriend gave her a 4-leaf clover necklace. Daphne's hands trembled slightly. This necklace must be very expensive. Where did you get the money? Return it. It's not expensive. I earned it from my part-time job. The boy smiled naively. I'll be able to work soon. Then I'll buy you whatever you want. I remembered my 20th birthday. At that time, my mother had passed away. My father suddenly realized his love for her. He was annoyed, depressed, and full of remorse. When he was sober, he was very nice to me and would fulfill all my requests. But when he was drunk, he would stare at me with bloodshot eyes and question me, if you had been obedient and sensible your mother wouldn't have committed suicide. You're also a murderer. We're all murderers. It seemed that he loved me, but he also hated me. It was Cassius who accompanied me to school, walked me home, and stayed with me when I was in a daze. He watched me smoke, drink, and fight. When I was accused by my father, he pulled me upstairs. On that moonlit night, he asked me, Celine, do you want to be a good-for-nothing for your whole life? If you decide so, then I will let you go. Later, I left my bad friends behind and started to study hard. The joy of solving problems suppressed the endless darkness pouring out from my heart. After the college entrance examination, I went to the same city as him, and our two schools were right next to each other. On the day the admission notices arrived, I went singing with Orion and the others. In the dim private room, Orion took out a ring and confessed his love to me. I smiled and kicked him. Don't play tricks on me. I already have someone I like. Who is it? I hooked Cassius' neck in the corner. Hey, how about being my boyfriend? I seemed carefree on the surface, but in fact, my palms were sweating nervously. He was silent for 5 or 6 seconds. Then he nodded, okay. I laughed loudly. Tipsy from the wine, I put my arms around his neck and kissed him. His lips were very soft. The music in the private room was so noisy, but it couldn't drown out my crazy heartbeat. We held hands under the table in the library, we kissed among the flowers in the English corner, we walked side by side on the midnight street. That was the happiest time for me after my mother died. But everything was broken on my 20th birthday. Cassius brought a petite girl to my birthday party and introduced her. This is Lilith, the girl next door when I was a kid. She's now a junior in the same major as me. He used the money he had promised to earn from his part-time job to buy me a birthday present to pay Lilith's tuition instead. He bought me a crystal ball worth 48 yuan as a gift. The shoddy base pierced my palm. The blood smeared on the surface of the ball, which was shocking. I got really angry, but Cassius said, there's a birthday every year, but studying is a big thing. Celine, you've lived a life of luxury since childhood. You don't understand our situation at all. From the age of 15 to 20, we spent a quarter of our lives together. But now, with just the words you and we, he easily drew a line between us. They talked about childhood anecdotes in a dialect that I couldn't understand. They worked in the same store and earned money through part-time jobs. He wore the hat given by Lilith every day, but put the shoes I gave him on the shelf. On our second anniversary, we had an appointment to watch a movie. Cassius came with Lilith. Lilith hasn't seen a 3D movie yet. Let's go together. He went to buy tickets, and the gentle and obedient Lilith showed her true face. Celine, Cassius is only with you to repay your kindness. I'm his real childhood sweetheart. I was so angry that I slapped her. Cassius happened to turn around and saw the scene. In the bustling waiting area, he said sternly, Celine, don't think that just because you're rich you can do whatever you want. You should apologize to Lilith right now. He raised all his thorns and protected Lilith behind him. And I was left there, being pointed at by everyone. I stared at him. Let's break up. Cassius couldn't believe it. What did you say? I liked to throw tantrums, but my love for him was real. I had never used breaking up as a bargaining chip. Or perhaps I knew that he wouldn't keep me. So, I didn't dare to say it out loud before. I said let's break up. I looked at Lilith's hand on his arm and felt an unbearable pain, and couldn't help but say something mean. I, the rich young lady, am tired of this game. I won't play along anymore. At that moment, his face flushed, and he gritted his teeth. Don't you regret it? Never. Sure enough, he didn't try to keep me. And just like that, we went our separate ways. I heard that he won another national award. I heard that he ate in the cafeteria with Lilith every day. I heard that they took photos under the cherry blossom trees. But I didn't hear that they became a couple. I thought that I would never have anything to do with him again in this life. But in my senior year, my father was diagnosed with acute leukemia. He seemed to wither away overnight. He called Cassius and me to his bedside, held my hand. If Dad leaves, you'll be all alone in this world. Before I die, can I see you get married? Okay. I made a phone call to Orion and asked him to play a scene with me. He's now an outstanding student in the medical school and our families are old friends. My father should be able to rest assured. When Orion arrived at the hospital, he brought the household register and the property ownership certificate. But my father wasn't happy. He just kept looking at Cassius. Cassius stared at our intertwined fingers and said word by word, Uncle Aldrich, I want to marry Celine. Is that okay? You see, even the proposal wasn't directed at me, but the wedding was still held in a rush. My friends all advised me to be careful. I didn't dare to tell them that actually, I was happy to marry him. They would surely scold me for being cheap, but in my girlhood, it was he who had been pulling me hard all the time so that I didn't sink into the mire. On our wedding night, Lilith confessed her love to Cassius passionately but was rejected. She got drunk in a bar, had an argument with someone, and was taken to the police station. He received the call and rushed out in a hurry and didn't come back all night. I decided not to sit around waiting for things to happen. I brought Lilith into my circle. She soon met a rich second-generation heir and got married in a flash and had a child. However, when the child was 6 months old, she found that her glamorous husband's family was actually a rotten tree, already hollowed out inside and in debt up to their necks. The couple had an argument, and her husband slapped her. That day, Lilith came to me and Cassius crying. She held the child and asked me with teary eyes, "Did you know there was something wrong with Li Cheng long ago? You did it on purpose and were just waiting for this day, right?" Cassius stared at me. "Celine, was all this really premeditated by you? If you trusted me, you wouldn't have asked such a question at all." I was so angry that I laughed instead. Could I force her to get married by holding her head down? If she hadn't been after someone's money, could she have been cheated? Cassius's gaze was so cold. "Celine, in your eyes, when I married you, was I also after your money? Are we poor people doomed to be looked down upon by you rich ladies?" His self-esteem was too strong. It hurt both himself and me. After Lilith got divorced, she began to interfere in my life with Cassius frequently and provoked me again and again. No matter how grand the love was, it couldn't withstand the erosion of repeated disappointments. Finally, between Cassius and me, there was only mutual dislike left. But why should I fulfill their wishes? As long as I didn't leave, she would always be a mistress who couldn't see the light of day. But now, I'm tired. A marriage involving 3 people is really too crowded. If I died, Lilith would accompany him to handle my death procedures and sign my cremation consent form. That would definitely be especially disgusting. 2 days later, my fever went down a bit. I wanted to contact Cassius to go for the registration. Just as I took out my mobile phone, the door of the ward was pushed open. Cassius said eagerly, "Celine, Feli has been in a car accident. Now he needs blood. There isn't enough panda blood in the blood bank. Come with me quickly." It was so easy for him to find me. But during the days when I was hospitalized, he had never come to visit me. I replied coldly, "I can't give him blood." Cassius raised his voice, and his eyes were icy cold. "Celine, this is a matter of life and death. Don't be so vicious. Don't involve our grudges with the innocent child." Last time when I fell downstairs, Cassius spoke harshly to me. Instead, Feli, who was just over 2 years old, wobbled downstairs, touched my hand, and looked up at me and asked, "Auntie, does it hurt? Do you want me to blow on it for you?" I took out my mobile phone and wanted to send a WeChat message. Those of us with panda blood have a local group. If there are special circumstances, we can post the demand information in the group and everyone will help each other and come to donate nearby. Lilith also rushed into the ward and knelt down with a plop. She snatched my mobile phone and threw it aside, begging pitifully, "Celine, don't play with your mobile phone first. Please save my child. 400 milliliters, just 400 milliliters is enough." Cassius echoed. "Celine, 400 milliliters won't be fatal for you." He stepped forward, grabbed my hand and dragged me out. "Come on, follow me to the emergency room. Feli is still waiting." I thought that my heart had been emptied and I wouldn't feel anything anymore. But at this moment, it felt as if countless steel needles were stabbing into my internal organs. The intense pain spread through my body. Every nerve on my head was pulled hard and it hurt like an explosion. "It hurts. Let go of me." "I won't let go. Cassius, she must donate blood today, or Feli's life won't be saved." Cassius held my hand even tighter. The bones were almost about to break. Lilith was in a hurry. She reached out and pushed me hard on the back. I staggered and fell to the ground. My nasal cavity felt wet. I reached out and wiped it and the back of my hand was stained with a glaring red. At this time, Orion came over with the examination report. Seeing the situation clearly, he clenched his fist and punched Cassius in the face. I hugged him immediately. "No, Orion. You're still protecting him even now." "No." I held him tightly. "I'm protecting you. If you fight with the patient's family in the hospital, what will happen to your future?" Cassius frowned tightly. "Celine, there will be plenty of time for you two to be affectionate after you donate blood." Orion was dealing with my nosebleed urgently while sneering. "You want your wife who has acute myeloid leukemia to donate 400 milliliters of blood to your mistress's son? Cassius, aren't you afraid of getting retribution?" Cassius was stunned for a moment and then looked at me. "Leukemia? Celine, are you even using the cliched plot in Korean dramas now?" Orion was furious. He threw the report in his hand at Cassius's face. "The blood test report just came out. Look at it yourself. Acute myeloid leukemia. If you don't treat it actively, you'll surely die in half a year." Daphne, who was in the same ward, was awakened at some point. She took off her hat, revealing her bald head. She said softly, "This is the ward of the hematology department. Everyone living on this floor has leukemia." Cassius picked up the reports on the ground and read them one by one. Lilith shook his arm anxiously. "Cassius, does having leukemia mean she can't donate blood to Feli? Then what should Feli do?" Cassius was looking at the reports and ignored her words. Bit by bit, bloodshot filled his eyes. My father had leukemia at that time, and he had studied these data, so perhaps he could tell something from them. Lilith then stared at me. "Celine, you're rich and you know so many people. You must have a way, right?" "I do." I curled my lower lip. "If you kneel down and apologize and beg me, I can help you send a message." Lilith tensed up all over. "Feli is still a child. How can you just stand by and watch him die?" I interrupted her impatiently. "He's not my son. Haven't you always thought I was vicious? Then I can't let this reputation be in vain. If you ask for help, you should have the proper attitude of asking for help." Lilith swallowed hard and looked at Cassius pitifully. "Cassius." The man came back to his senses from the examination report and said in a deep voice, "When asking for help, one should show sincerity." Lilith couldn't believe it, and her face turned deathly pale. She took a deep breath, slowly bent her knees, and said through gritted teeth, "I'm sorry. It's my fault. Selena, I beg you." The ward was extremely quiet at this moment. Only Lilith's heavy and humiliated breathing echoed repeatedly. I sent a message in the group. Soon, 2 people replied, saying that they weren't far away and could come within half an hour. "Lilith, if you were the one lying in the hospital bed now, I would definitely stand by and watch you die and even applaud loudly." Lilith was in tears, speaking in a pretentious way. "I know you hate me. I just didn't expect that you would be so cruel to a child." She reached out to grab Cassius. "Cassius, let's go. Feli is still waiting." The man shook her off, clenched the report and walked to my bedside. His eyes were bloodshot, and his voice trembled. "Celine, are you playing tricks on me? These reports are all fake, right? You've been causing me trouble every day. How could you have leukemia?" I lay on the bed and looked at him indifferently. Such a look finally made his eyes turn blood red. Lilith was extremely worried. "Cassius, I guess she's just pretending to be sick. Let's go back to the emergency room first." Cassius turned his head and pointed at the door. "Get out, okay?" Lilith's face suddenly turned pale. She bit her lip hard and tears rolled down her cheeks. "Cassius, you're scolding me." In the past, whenever she shed tears, everything would become my fault. But now, Cassius's eyes were fixed on me. He questioned Orion. "It's been so long. Why is her nosebleed still flowing?" Orion changed the cotton ball for me and snorted coldly. "The platelet count is low, and there's a blood coagulation disorder, so it's easy for the bleeding to not stop. If you hadn't pushed her down, this wouldn't have happened." Cassius suddenly turned his head and stared straight at Lilith. Lilith was full of grievances. "I didn't mean it. I was also in a hurry to save the child. Feli is still waiting for me. I'll leave first. Cassius, you must come over later. The child will be very sad if he wakes up and doesn't see you." Daphne had been watching quietly all along. At this time, she asked curiously, "Is Feli this brother's son?" Lilith's face changed slightly. I glanced at Daphne. "Oh, today's college students are really something. They get to the point." Daphne winked at me playfully. Lilith left, and the air in the ward became much cleaner. The nurse pushed a trolley in and was going to give me an intravenous drip. Cassius reached out to cover my eyes. "Don't be afraid." I pushed his hand away. "No need to cover. I'm not afraid now. I used to be very afraid of injections. Because when I was sick as a child, my mother wouldn't comfort me gently. Instead, she frowned and said, 'Why are you so delicate?' The cold syringe was inserted into my body. I cried in fear, but all I got in return was her disgust. 'It doesn't hurt. What's there to cry about?' So later, whenever I was sick, I endured it. Until Cassius discovered my secret. He accompanied me when I was sick to the infirmary and covered my eyes when the doctor gave me an injection. At that time, his hand was very warm." Cassius's Adam's apple bobbed, and he said sheepishly, "I remember you were very afraid of this before. Why aren't you afraid now?" Let me think. It should be not long after getting married when my father passed away. My relationship with him wasn't that deep at that time, but after all, he was my father. I was only 23 years old at that time. Suddenly, I became an orphan without parents. For many consecutive days, I would dream of my father and mother quarreling when I was a child. I was awakened every night. Moreover, the flu was prevalent in spring. I fell ill and coughed terribly. After dragging on for a week, I couldn't bear it anymore and went to the hospital for an examination. It had already developed into pneumonia. I had to have an intravenous drip. I called Cassius, who was on a business trip. He hung up. He sent me a WeChat message. "This meeting is very important. Don't call casually in the future unless there's something major." I stared wide-eyed as the slender needle tip was inserted into my blood vessel. I told myself over and over again, Celine, you're already an orphan. You have no parents, and your husband doesn't love you. Being squeamish about being afraid of injections doesn't suit you. You have to overcome it. After having the intravenous drip for 5 consecutive days, I really wasn't afraid anymore. You see, women are not squeamish and independent enough just because they haven't been deeply loved. Now, as I told this story, my tone was calm and composed. But Cassius was shaking violently all over. He lowered his head and covered his face, revealing 2 whorls on his head. I'm sorry. I was eager to prove myself at that time. Actually, after getting married, we also had a short sweet period. My father, despite being sick, took Cassius to meet his friends from all aspects. He got a lot of opportunities and received countless praises, but there were always some mean people. When mentioning him, they would say, is he the son-in-law of Lilith's father? He's smart. He found a good wife and a good father-in-law. With such a platform, as long as one isn't a fool, one can win easily. No matter how much I comforted him, these words always stimulated his strong self-esteem. So, he wanted to tell everyone that even without me, Celine, he could still stand at the top. He abandoned me to prove himself. A small area on the snow-white bedsheet was wet. Cassius raised his head, and there were still tears in his eyes. He slapped himself hard, and his pale face instantly turned red. Celine, it was all my fault in the past. Have a good chemotherapy and stay alive. I'll make amends to you. I'll listen to you in everything from now on, okay? Okay. I agreed so quickly that he was even a bit stunned. I smiled at him and said, well, let's go and register for the divorce first. He froze. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down repeatedly, and when he opened his mouth, his voice was hoarse. Celine, you're not feeling well now. Have a good rest first. Let's not talk about this. It was he who wanted the divorce in the first place. Did he regret it now that he knew I was dying? I looked at him quietly and stabbed right at his sore spot when I spoke. If you don't agree, do you want to inherit my huge fortune after I die? He clenched his fist suddenly. Then he turned around and quickly walked out of the ward. That's just how it was. Whenever money was mentioned, it would hurt his pride and he would lose his temper. After a few minutes, he came back. He was holding a pen and a piece of paper in his hands. His tone was so humble, you write it down. Write that I won't get a penny of your property in the future. You can give it to whoever you like. Don't mention the divorce again. We'll get through this difficult time together. You'll definitely be okay. Orion was called away by other patients, and Daphne pretended to be asleep with headphones on. The ward was unusually quiet. I sighed softly, no need. I've already made my will. I know you don't care about it, so I haven't left you a penny of my property. The A4 paper in Cassius's hand was crumpled into a ball. His tone rose filled with the despair of not wanting to admit the truth. Don't mention the will, don't mention the will. You won't die, Celine. Get active treatment. You won't die. You won't die. The fluorescent light shone on his paper-white face and the panic and helplessness in his eyes. I asked him with a light smile, Cassius, I asked you before that if I died, would you regret it? You said it was my own doing and that you wouldn't shed a single tear for me. When I was healthy and lively, you stabbed me in the heart. Now that I'm dying, you've suddenly come to your senses? Don't you think you're ridiculous? At this moment, if Cassius hadn't been holding on to the edge of the bed, it seemed that he wouldn't have been able to stand steadily. It was as if all the strength in his body had been drained away. After a long silence, he said in a hoarse voice, Celine, I'm sorry. No need to apologize. Just get the divorce done as soon as possible. I looked at him quietly, unless you want to watch me die in 3 months. He was already on the verge of breaking down. Why must we get divorced? I closed my eyes wearily, because I don't love you anymore. I don't want you to sign my treatment consent form, I don't want you to cremate me, I don't want you to bury me, and I don't want you to come to my grave as my husband in the future and disturb my peace. It seemed that Cassius had fallen. The things on the table all fell to the ground. There was a clattering sound in the ward. I was so tired. I didn't want to open my eyes to look anymore. When I woke up again, I met Lilith's gloomy eyes. Daphne was sitting by the head of the bed, staring at her intently. Seeing that I woke up, she scratched her head. I tried to make her leave, but she wouldn't go. Thanks. It's okay. I propped myself up on the bed and sat up. Then I heard Lilith say, are you trying to trap him forever just because you're sick? The water by the bedside was warm. There was no taste of tap water that I hated. I picked it up and took a sip, then replied slowly, it seems your son has passed the critical period. Parents are role models for their children, Lilith. Be a decent person. Lilith raised her voice, sounding extremely shrill, Celine, you're not qualified to teach my child. Besides having money, where are you worthy of Cassius? Shut up. She's worthy of him in every way. With a forceful tone, the ward door was pushed open. Cassius walked to my bedside with a thermos in his hand. The curtains weren't drawn, and the sun at around 10 o'clock was shining on his hair. Clearly, his hair was still black last night. But just in one short night, there were dense strands of glaring white hair at his temples. So, it's true that a person's hair can turn white overnight. Lilith obviously noticed it too and said in astonishment, "Your hair." Cassius looked at me and forced a smile. "Celine, I'm not worthy of you. I'm a coward. I have nothing. I didn't even dare to admit that I love you." His tone became lower and lower. "You're so good. You're like a proud rose. You lack nothing. What do I have to love you with?" So that's how it was. Before, I never understood why we could support each other in high school, but in college, we went our separate ways instead. It turned out that he had saved me when I was in a difficult situation, but he couldn't appreciate the beautiful flower that I had become. I indeed used to be a flamboyant red wild rose in the wilderness. Because I loved him. I pulled out my thorns one by one and showed a gentle and obedient appearance. But Cassius, you tore off my petals one by one and stepped on them into the dust with other women. Cassius lowered his head. "I'm sorry. You always have so many friends. You can easily win everyone's affection. I've always been trying hard to match you. But I found that I couldn't do it no matter what. Because I had seen him at his most down and out. I had seen his socks with holes, his frayed white shirt, and seen him being severely criticized by my mother. I had seen him blushing when asking my father for the exam paper fee. So, in front of me, he always felt inferior. I found it ridiculous, but you've also seen all my embarrassments. I've never disliked you for being poor or minded your background, yet you've been brooding over my wealth and excellence. Cassius, I was really blind to have fallen for you back then. Fortunately, now that we're getting divorced, I can have a few months of peace." Lilith's face had been looking very unpleasant. At this time, she grasped the key point. "Divorce?" I smiled charmingly. "Yes. Finally, the day has come. Are you happy?" A secret smile appeared at the corner of Lilith's mouth, but she quickly suppressed it. She must be overjoyed inside. However, if she thought about it more deeply, she should know that she could never compete with a dying person in her whole life. Sure enough, Cassius said in a hoarse voice, "Celine, don't talk nonsense. I won't marry anyone else in my life." While arguing with Lilith just now, I sent a file to Orion. At this moment, he had printed it out and brought it to me. I stuffed the file into Cassius's hands. "This is the divorce agreement. The ancestral house of the Celine family, along with several other houses and some stocks, belong to me. Your house, car, and your company belong to you. If you have no objections, just sign it. We'll go to register this afternoon." Before Cassius could reply, Lilith couldn't hold back. "First. Isn't this unfair? Why do you get so much?" Cassius suppressed his anger. "Lilith, this has nothing to do with you." Lilith was so reckless. "Cassius, I'm doing this for your own good. She's dying anyway. What's the use of her having so many assets?" Slap. Before she could finish speaking, Cassius slapped her. "Shut up. She won't die, she won't die." Lilith's face was turned to one side, and 5 bright red finger marks appeared on it. She was stunned. After a while, she said in a trembling voice, "Cassius, you hit me? You hit me because of Celine?" TSK. Although there was no love left in my heart, I still felt quite happy watching this dog-eat-dog drama. I said maliciously, "You cursed me to die, and he's so afraid that I might really die. Of course, he'll hit you. Look, it's better for you to stay as pretentious as before and stop telling the truth." The veins on Lilith's neck bulged, and her lips trembled. Orion sneered beside her, "With your little thoughts, who can you deceive? These properties were given to Celine by her uncle and aunt before marriage. Even if it goes to court, it has nothing to do with Cassius. On the contrary, for the house he has now, if we seriously look into it, the part of the mortgage repayment during the marriage is marital property and should be divided equally. Read more books and newspapers. Don't just learn how to act all day long." Lilith's face flushed red with anger, and she couldn't refute a single word. Orion also took the opportunity to drive her out of the ward. She looked pitiful, looking back every few steps. But Cassius's eyes had been fixed on the divorce agreement. He didn't even spare her a glance from the corner of his eye. The man's hand that took the pen was shaking, and his voice was extremely hoarse. "Celine, you're so cruel." "I'm cruel? I was just too weak before." Orion persuaded his mentor to let me leave the hospital to go through the divorce registration. I also took the ID photos needed for getting the certificate after the cooling-off period. Interestingly, on the wall of the small room, there was still the photo we took when Cassius and I got married. "Hey, weren't you quite happy when you got married? Why are you getting divorced so soon?" At that time, on the surface, I was morally coerced by my father to get married, so when we came to take the photo, I didn't dare to dress up flamboyantly. I was afraid that others would see my deep affection and love. Because my makeup was light, I wasn't satisfied after several shots and kept picking on this or that. Fortunately, the photographer was experienced and said, "The bride can't be so plain. Go to the next door to put on some makeup and come back." While I was putting on full makeup, Cassius was waiting beside me. I was afraid that he would be impatient and kept urging him to hurry up. Later, the photo came out with a good effect. The photographer asked me if he could use it as a promotional photo. I agreed without hesitation. Cassius didn't object either. The photographer adjusted the angle and sighed again. You've lost a lot of weight. Your haggardness can't even be covered by makeup. Your ex-husband also looks a lot older. His hair has turned white. I smiled happily. Yes. I should have divorced earlier. It's my fault for always being sentimental. The photographer quickly finished taking the photos. I watched him doing the layout and printing and said, please help me change it to a white background later. Print one in 10 inches and another in 20 inches. He paused his movements. Pa. You're so young. Why are you printing photos with a white background? I shrugged. I might die soon. I'll just print my posthumous photo while I'm at it. I'm afraid I won't have a chance to take another photo before I die. The photographer turned his head and stared at me for a few seconds, as if to make sure that I wasn't joking. Then he frantically moved the mouse. I'll help you retouch it and make it look nicer. No need. Just leave it like this. It'll remind me not to be so lovesick in my next life. The photographer had an expression like, I'm really damned, and said softly, then I'll copy the original image for you. I walked out with a stack of photos in my hand. The sky was gloomy. Cassius was waiting on the steps outside the Civil Affairs Bureau. The wind blew the broken hair on his forehead. He raised his head, his eyes following me. Lilith's call came. Cassius, where are you? Felly woke up and couldn't find you anywhere. He's crying anxiously. Could you come and have a look? It was almost time to get off work. A newlywed couple probably hurrying to register for marriage bumped into me. They apologized hurriedly and left in a rush. The photos in my hand fell all over the ground. Cassius saw the two photos with a white background, the black and white posthumous photos. He seemed to be struck by lightning out of thin air and his body swayed violently. He said indifferently to the person on the other end of the phone, I'm very busy. I don't have time. Then he hung up the phone. He quickly stepped forward and picked up those two photos. Trying his best to suppress his voice, he questioned me, Celine, what are you doing? Didn't you say that you would cooperate with the treatment after the divorce? I snatched the photos from his hands. Coughing, I replied, yes. Even if I receive active treatment, I'm still very likely to die. When my hair falls out then, the photos won't look good. It's better to prepare for it earlier. Look, the photos are nice, aren't they? His eyes were bloodshot. He paced back and forth on the steps in agitation. How can you be so nonchalant about it? He was like a trapped beast in a cage. I enjoyed watching his anxiety. How delightful. I stabbed at his heart. I don't have parents who love me, and my ex-husband has been bringing his mistress to irritate me all the time. There's no point in living. Maybe it'll be more comfortable to die. All the remaining color on Cassius' face disappeared completely. He was already thin. Now, with the wind blowing, he looked as if he could be blown away at any moment. He punched himself hard on the head. I deserve to die, Celine. I really deserve to die. He held my hand, and his scalding tears dropped onto my cold palm. His eyes were full of earnest pleas. I beg you to live well, to survive and watch me in hell, okay? I pulled my hand back with a smile and wiped it on his black coat. Come to think of it, I don't really care whether you're in hell or not. Now, please disappear from my sight. I looked at him with a smile. Okay, ex-husband? Back at the hospital, Orion saw my black and white photos. With red eyes, he was about to tear them up. Tearing them up is useless. I have the original files. I can just print them again if you tear them up. He held my shoulders. Celine, are you trying to make me mad? I chided him, relax a little. You look so gloomy every day. It really affects my mood. If you keep this up, I'll transfer to another hospital. Orion stared at me unblinkingly, and the surging tears in his eyes gradually subsided. Celine, you're so heartless. Otherwise, what else could I do? I'm dying anyway, should I be sad and weepy all day long? I've been sad enough in the past 3 years. I finally had a good sleep. The next day when I woke up, Daphne was standing by the window, looking at me as if she wanted to say something but hesitated. I got out of bed and walked over. I found Cassius sitting on the stone bench downstairs, holding a bunch of red roses, like a statue. It was drizzling outside. He must have been sitting there for a long time. Big drops of water were hanging on his hair, and the color of his coat was mottled. It was the end of March. The pink and white saucer magnolias were in full bloom all over the trees, swaying in the drizzle. It made him look even gloomier and more dejected. I dialed his number. He seemed to wake up suddenly and jumped up from the stone bench. He shook his head vigorously and then gently wiped the water drops off the roses with his fingers. Then he pressed the answer button. His voice was filled with joy. Celine, are you awake? I'll come up to see you right now. I replied indifferently, don't appear within my sight. It really spoils my mood. His body stiffened, and he suddenly turned around. Through the glass, we stared at each other from a distance. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hand holding the roses was shaking slightly. Celine? I interrupted him, call me Miss Celine, or ex-wife. Thick mist gathered in his eyes, and his voice was also damp with the moisture of spring. Celine, please. Let me take care of you, okay? I firmly refused, I don't need it. I can hire a caregiver with money. They'll be at my beck and call, meticulous and considerate, 100 times better than you. Get lost. If you don't want me to die too soon, don't show up in front of me and make me feel bad. He seemed to have lost his spine and completely collapsed. I started to receive induction remission treatment. A large amount of medicine entered my body to quickly and massively kill the diseased cells. The dosage of the medicine was large, and the side effects were also strong. I felt nauseous, vomited, and couldn't eat anything every day. I lost weight rapidly, and my hair fell out in handfuls. But the effect wasn't. Orion was even more anxious than I was, his hair looking like a mess. That day, he showed me a video. I opened it. There were familiar names but unfamiliar faces inside. Is it recording now? Half Moon, my WeChat name, I'm White Panda. You once told me that we with panda blood are born kissed by God. I had depression before, and it was you who always encouraged me to get out of it. We agreed to go to Thailand to watch performances together when we had time. You must get well, Half Moon, I'm Rabbit. Before, when my mother had an operation, it was you who secretly paid the operation fee. I haven't earned enough money to pay you back yet. You can't die. Half Moon, I'm Seven Dreams. This group was founded by you. If you die, our backbone will be broken. Even for the sake of us with panda blood, you have to hold on. I watched them one by one and my eyes felt terribly sore. Orion touched my head. The tutor said that the patient's will to live is very important. As soon as they heard that you were sick, they were all so worried and asked me if they needed to donate blood. Besides them, I also really need you to live. His hand landed on my shoulder with a burning temperature. Celine, if you die here, die under my care, maybe I won't have the confidence to save anyone else for the rest of my life. I raised my eyes and saw the struggle and pain in his eyes. I reached out and gently patted his head. I got it. I'll try my best to live. Yeah. The world is so big. There are still many people who need me and care about me. I still have a lot of money left to spend. I'm going to live well. Since that day, the medicine began to have a significant effect and my condition started to improve. Cassius still showed up from time to time. His hair had turned even whiter. Now there was more white hair than black hair and he had lost a lot of weight. The clothes that used to fit him now hung loosely on his body. Every day of chemotherapy was really tough. But a month passed anyway. My condition was temporarily relieved but there was still a long consolidation period to follow. Cassius and I went to get the divorce certificate as agreed. Coming out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, Lilith with full makeup on and wearing a thin white long dress was waiting at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. She was also holding her ID card and household register. I found it funny just looking at her. I raised my mobile phone and pointed it at her. What? Are you two planning to register for marriage today? Lilith stared at Cassius eagerly and went to hold his arm. Cassius, there's no time like the present. Didn't you say that you would protect me for a lifetime? Cassius took 3 steps back and quickly explained to me, Celine, don't misunderstand. I've already made it clear to her before. I smiled, no need to explain. We're already divorced. Now it's your freedom to hang out with whoever you want. I tightened my coat. After chemotherapy, because I lost weight so quickly, I became very afraid of the cold. Cassius quickly took off his coat and was about to put it on me but I pushed him away. No, I think it's dirty. Lilith rubbed her own arm looking pitiful. Cassius, I'm cold too. Cassius said in disgust, if you're cold, put on more clothes. I posted my divorce certificate on Moments. And I called the uncles I knew one by one. Cassius had set up his own company, and many of his clients were old friends of my grandfather and father. The elders would all ask with concern, why on earth did you get divorced? I was silent for a few seconds and then said casually, Uncle Zhao, to be honest, the reason I divorced him is that he cheated on me. I just finished chemotherapy in the hospital. I have the same illness as my father. What? The voice on the other end of the phone suddenly rose. Okay, I got it. Actually, on the day I got the divorce receipt, I wanted to announce it to the whole world, but I was afraid that Cassius would change his mind during the cooling off period. Uncle Zhao and Aunt Zhang came to see me in the hospital the next day. Aunt Zhang held my hand crying and sniffling, you poor child. Why are you so unlucky? When they left, they ran into Cassius downstairs. I stood by the window and watched Aunt Zhang scold him harshly. He hung his head deeply and didn't say a word in rebuttal. That night, Aunt Zhang sent me a message. Celine, your Uncle Zhao has cancelled the cooperation with Cassius. After my father died, Cassius set up another company. He wanted to make a name for himself. Ironically, most of his clients were still old friends of my grandfather and father. Uncle Zhao's cancellation of cooperation was like pushing down the first domino. More and more clients started to go back on their word. They didn't renew the contracts or made all kinds of difficulties about the goods delivered. Orion sighed, the uncles are really kind to you. There was some kindness, indeed. But more importantly, Cassius received great favors from my father but turned out to be an ungrateful person. Who would dare to cooperate with an ungrateful person? Rather than worrying about being bitten by this wolf one day, it's better to stay away from him. Orion stared at me, Celine, you've really grown up. Since you can let go of the past, then live well. Let's apply for a bone marrow transplant. As long as we can find a suitable match, we can live to be 100 years old. Outside the window, the roses in the flower bed were in full bloom. I withdrew my gaze and nodded, well, I'll try my best to live. Cassius still came to the hospital often, but most of the time, he was downstairs making phone calls one after another, begging the clients to change their minds. And he humbly begged the bank to give him more time. He had mortgaged his house and car, but it was still far from enough. At the beginning, he expanded his business too ambitiously. He didn't know that the bank loan could be approved because as his wife, I had enough assets. Now that the company belongs to him, the debts naturally belong to him too. These 2 years had been smooth sailing for him, and he probably forgot his own capabilities. Now, he should understand, right? That day, the caregiver pushed me downstairs for a walk. Coincidentally, he walked out from the bushes. Our eyes met. His lips moved, and he smiled bitterly, I guess you've heard about it. The capital chain of my company has broken. Several key employees left with their subordinates. Now the company is in a state of panic. I looked up at him and didn't say a word. His lips trembled, and suddenly he threw himself in front of my wheelchair, looking up at me and pleading, Celine, let's remarry. It's my fault. It's all my fault. Please give me a hand. Please save me. When he first set up his new company and couldn't get clients, I accompanied him to visit old friends one by one. I looked at him quietly, do you think I'll make the same heartbreaking mistake a second time? All the color on Cassius' lips disappeared. I know you won't help me again. Yes. How could I fall into the hands of the same scoundrel twice? His tone became even more dejected, Lilith, she's found a new boyfriend and cut off all contact with me.